Arizona Territory, 1868. Silence had become Nora McKenna's closest companion. 2 years of it, stretching across the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert, broken only by the occasional whistle of wind through the ponderosa pines surrounding her isolated cabin. She preferred it that way. Silence couldn't betray her. Silence couldn't take everything she loved. The winter wind howled across the plateau as Nora added another log to the hearth fire. Her slender fingers, once soft and delicate, had grown calloused from the daily labor of survival. The small cabin she'd built with her husband James felt too large now, too empty. Yet it was all she had left. Outside, the first flakes of an early snowfall began to dust the rocky terrain. Nora wrapped a shawl tightly around her shoulders, then froze at the sound. A thud against her door, then another. Her hand instinctively reached for the rifle always kept loaded by the entrance. 2 years alone in Apache territory had taught her to trust nothing but her own reflexes. Stepping carefully across the wooden floor, she positioned herself behind the door, weapon ready. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. No answer came, only a strange, wet sliding sound against the wood. Nora's jaw tightened. Mountain lion, perhaps, wounded after a hunt gone wrong. She'd dealt with such threats before. With practiced precision, she unlatched the door and pushed it open just enough to peer outside, rifle barrel first. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. A man, no, not just any man, an Apache warrior lay crumpled on her threshold, blood pooling beneath him on the fresh snow. His long black hair hung in tangled strands across a face contorted in pain. But even in agony, there was something unnervingly powerful about him, something familiar in the worst possible way. Nora's finger twitched on the trigger. This was her chance. One pull and she could avenge James, avenge the life that had been stolen from her by raiders who had looked just like this man. The warrior's eyes flickered open, dark, penetrating eyes that somehow cut through her defenses, even as he lay dying. He spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper in perfect, unaccented English. "Either shoot me or help me, woman. The snow falls quickly." Nora's grip on the rifle tightened. "Get off my land," she hissed. "I don't help your kind." A pained smile crossed his face, revealing strong white teeth against copper skin. "My kind? And what kind is that?" "Murderer," she spat. Despite his wounds, he managed to pull himself up slightly, leaving a dark smear of blood across her doorframe. "I've killed men," he admitted, "as has any soldier in any war, but I've never murdered innocents." "Liar." Nora jabbed the rifle forward. He didn't flinch, despite the barrel now inches from his face. "The men who killed your husband, they weren't my people." Ice flooded her veins. "How could you possibly?" "The abandoned homestead 3 miles east." McKenna carved above the door. "Everyone knows what happened there." His breath came in labored gasps now, his shoulders slumping. "I was tracking the men responsible when these wounds found me." "Get out," Nora said, trying to push the door closed, but his body blocked it. "I won't have an Apache die in my home." With what seemed like his last ounce of strength, the warrior braced his arm against the door. Blood seeped through his buckskin shirt, where at least 2 bullets had found their mark. "Fight me all you want," he whispered, his dark eyes boring into hers. "I'm staying." When he said this, her blood boiled. How dare this man challenge her so, even as she stood over him with a loaded rifle? Nora could let him die. Should. But something in the way he looked at her, without pleading, without fear, just a strange understanding, paralyzed her. "The cavalry will be coming," he continued, his words beginning to slur. "They won't distinguish between us if they find me here. Make your choice." Against every instinct screaming within her, Nora lowered her rifle. She'd seen enough death, perhaps too much to willingly add to it, even if this man represented everything she'd grown to hate. "If you try anything," she warned, "I'll finish what those bullets started." She helped drag him inside, her touch clinical and distant. Every time her fingers brushed his skin, she flinched, either from not understanding the strange sensation that rippled through her, or from fighting against any connection between them. But something was stronger than her resistance, a feeling taking root within her that she refused to acknowledge. As she cut away his bloodied shirt to reveal the wounds beneath, Nora noticed scars, dozens of them, mapping a history of violence across his body. Bullet wounds, knife cuts, burns. This man had survived more than most could endure. "You have a name?" she asked curtly, pressing a cloth against the worst of the bleeding. "The white men call me Altaha," he answered, his eyes never leaving her face. "It means the one they fear." Nora's hands stilled. Even she had heard that name whispered in fear at the trading post. Altaha, the most feared Apache war leader in the territory, the ghost who left no survivors, except her. Here he was, bleeding on her floor. "Why did you come here?" she demanded, resuming her work with trembling fingers. "Because," he said, his voice fading as consciousness began to slip away, "I knew you'd be strong enough to either save me or kill me. There is no dishonor in either from hands like yours." His eyes closed then, leaving Nora alone with a decision that would change everything. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing his tracks and any choice of turning back. The fever came with the night. Altaha's skin burned beneath Nora's fingers as she worked to extract the second bullet lodged near his shoulder. Her medical knowledge was limited to what she'd learned from necessity, setting broken bones, stitching cuts, treating fevers with herbs gathered from the hills. "Hold still," she muttered, though he was beyond hearing her now. In his delirium, he spoke in his native tongue, words she couldn't understand but recognized as prayers, perhaps, or memories. Occasionally, English phrases broke through, commands to warriors, negotiations with white officers, and once, most disturbingly, gentle words that sounded like they were meant for a woman or child. When the second bullet finally came free, Nora sat back on her heels, exhausted. Why was she saving this man? Every rational thought told her to walk away, to let nature take its course. Yet here she was, wiping sweat from the brow of a warrior who represented the very forces that had destroyed her world. Altaha's eyes suddenly flew open, startlingly clear despite the fever. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "They're coming," he whispered urgently. Nora tried to pull away. "No one's coming. The storm has covered your tracks." "Not for me," he insisted. "For you. The men who took your husband, they've been watching your cabin." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. "What do you know about that day?" His grip loosened slightly, but his gaze remained intense. "I know you weren't there when they came. I know your husband died protecting something, and I know they believe you have it still." Nora jerked her hand away. "You're delirious." "The stone," he murmured, his eyes beginning to close again. "The blue stone from the sacred mountain. They think you have it." Before she could demand more answers, he had slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Nora with questions that churned like the snowstorm outside. Blue stone? James had never mentioned anything about a stone, sacred or otherwise. Yet as she moved to the cabinet where she kept her few valuables, a memory surfaced. James returning from a hunting trip the week before the attack, unusually quiet, something hidden in his saddlebag that he wouldn't show her. "It's safer if you don't know," he'd said, kissing her forehead. "Just a bit of luck, I found." Nora had thought nothing of it then. James was always finding interesting rocks or artifacts. But now, from the small wooden box where she kept James's pocket watch and their wedding rings, she withdrew a small leather pouch she'd found among his things afterward. Inside was a stone about the size of a robin's egg, turquoise, smoothly polished, with veins of darker blue running through it. She'd kept it as a memento, nothing more. But if what Altaha said was true, a sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin shutters, making Nora jump. She quickly returned the stone to its hiding place and went to check the windows. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing the world in white silence. If anyone was watching, they'd have a hard time approaching unseen in such conditions. Returning to Altaha's side, she studied his face. In repose, with the lines of pain smoothed away, he looked younger than she'd initially thought. Perhaps 30, with features that spoke of both hardness and dignity. What drove a man to become someone the entire territory feared? What had he lost to make him so formidable? "Who are you, really?" she whispered to his unconscious form. As if in answer, his hand moved slightly, coming to rest over a leather cord around his neck. Attached to it was a small deerskin pouch, similar to the one she'd just examined. Curiosity overwhelming caution, Nora gently opened it. Inside was not a stone, but a simple carved wooden pendant and a lock of black hair tied with sinew. The sight struck her with unexpected force. This feared warrior carried a memorial just as she did. Someone he had lost. Someone he couldn't let go. For the first time since dragging him inside, Nora looked at Altaha not as an enemy, but as a human being marked by the same grief that had shaped her own life. The realization disturbed her more than she cared to admit. Moving away from him, she stoked the fire and settled into her chair, rifle across her lap. The night stretched long ahead, and she didn't trust herself to sleep with him under her roof. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere beyond its silent curtain, danger waited. Nora McKenna had survived 2 years alone in this wilderness. She'd buried her husband and her dreams both. She'd learned to trust no one. But now an Apache war chief lay wounded on her floor, bringing with him secrets about the attack that had destroyed her life, and a strange, unwelcome feeling she couldn't quite name. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. The first rays of morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Nora hadn't slept. Her back ached from sitting upright all night in the hard chair, her eyes burning from watching every rise and fall of Altaha's chest. To her surprise, his condition had improved rather than worsened during the night. The fever had broken just before dawn, and his breathing had steadied. Apache resilience, she supposed, or perhaps sheer stubborn will. She moved quietly to check his wounds. The bleeding had stopped, and while infection remained a risk, the angry redness around the bullet holes had already begun to subside. As her fingers brushed against his skin to adjust the bandages, that same peculiar sensation returned, a warmth that traveled up her arm and settled uncomfortably in her chest. Nora withdrew her hand quickly, disturbed by her own reaction. "Your touch heals," came his voice, startling her, "even when you wish it wouldn't." His eyes were open, clear and alert in a way that seemed impossible for a man who had been at death's door just hours before. Nora stepped back, composing herself. "You should still be unconscious." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Disappointing you already?" "I need answers," she said, ignoring his attempt at levity. "You spoke of a blue stone last night, and men watching my cabin." Altaha's expression sobered. He attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. With reluctant assistance from Nora, he managed to prop himself against the wall. "How long have you been alone here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping the cabin's interior. "That's not an answer." "It is relevant," he insisted. "The men who killed your husband weren't looking for him. They were looking for something they believed he found, something that wasn't theirs to take." Nora crossed her arms. And what would an Apache war chief know about what happened to a white settler? A flash of something, hurt, indignation, crossed his features before he masked it. "I am Chiricahua. My people have lived in these mountains since before your people even dreamed of this land. We know when evil walks among us, whether that evil wears my skin or yours." He paused, studying her face. "The men who came here were neither Apache nor honest white settlers. They were deserters from the army, men who learned of sacred places from torturing my people. One of them, their leader, was an officer once, a man named Crawford." Nora's breath caught. She remembered the name from conversations overheard at the trading post. Major William Crawford, dishonorably discharged after accusations of brutality against Apache prisoners. He'd disappeared afterward, rumored to have formed a band of mercenaries who operated on both sides of the border. "What would Crawford want with a blue stone?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Altaha's dark eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. "Not just any stone. A piece of turquoise from Zil Naudili, the mountain where prayers are heard. To my people it is sacred. To men like Crawford it is the map to something far more valuable." "A map? It's just a stone." "The veins in true turquoise from that mountain match the waterways that lead to deposits of gold," he explained. "Gold that has remained hidden, because the mountain and its treasures are protected by my people." Nora thought of the small blue stone hidden in her cabinet. Could something so simple really lead to gold? And if it did, was that why James had died? "My husband was many things," she said carefully, "but he wasn't a thief or a treasure hunter." "Perhaps he found it by accident," Altaha suggested, "or perhaps someone planted it on him. Knowing Crawford's men would come looking, either way they believe you know where it is now." "And you?" Nora challenged. "Why were you tracking these men? For revenge for this sacred stone?" A shadow passed over his face. Both. Crawford's men raided my village while I was away. My wife, his voice caught, almost imperceptibly. My wife and son did not survive. The revelation struck Nora like a physical blow. The lock of hair in his medicine pouch, the gentle words he'd spoken in his delirium. This feared warrior had been a husband, a father. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Altaha looked away. "As am I for your loss." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of shared grief neither was ready to acknowledge. Finally, Nora spoke again. "You said you refused to leave because you wanted to protect me." He met her gaze directly. "I knew you were in danger the moment I found Crawford's scouts watching your cabin 2 days ago. I killed one, but the other escaped to warn him. That is how I received these." He gestured to his wounds. "They will return in greater numbers when the snow clears." "So you came here to use me as bait," Nora concluded bitterly. "No." His response was sharp, almost angry. "I came here to warn you. The wounds made that complicated." Before she could respond, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant whinny of a horse carried on the clear morning air. In an instant, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed. Altaha pushed himself fully upright despite his injuries, and Nora moved swiftly to the window, careful to stay hidden as she peered out. "One rider," she reported, squinting against the snow's glare. "Coming from the east, civilian clothes, but riding military style." Altaha's expression hardened. "Scout, looking to see if the storm has passed." "Or checking if I'm still alive," Nora added. She retrieved her rifle and checked the load. "If he sees smoke from your chimney and doesn't see you outside, he'll know something is wrong," Altaha warned. "These men know you live alone." Nora's mind raced. If the rider was indeed one of Crawford's men, she couldn't let him report back. But neither could she simply shoot an unknown rider who might be an innocent traveler. "I need to appear normal," she decided. "Like any other day." Altaha nodded grimly. "While I remain unseen." Their eyes met in silent understanding. Whatever lay between them, suspicion, resentment, or this strange, unwelcome connection, they now faced a common enemy. "Stay hidden," Nora instructed unnecessarily, moving toward the door. "And if this goes badly—" "It won't," he interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You are stronger than they know. It is why you're still alive." Something in his tone, respect perhaps, or simple truth, steadied her. With a deep breath, Nora arranged her features into a mask of ordinary calm and stepped outside into the brilliant winter morning. The approaching rider was still distant, making his way slowly through the snow-covered terrain. She busied herself with the mundane, fetching water from the well, checking her small woodpile, movements any woman alone would make on a winter morning after a storm. All the while, her senses remained heightened, her body positioned to keep the rifle just inside the doorway within reaching distance. The rider drew closer, and details became clearer. A youngish man with a scraggly beard, wearing a mixture of civilian and military clothing. His right hand remained suspiciously close to his holstered pistol. When he was within 50 yards, he called out, "Hello, the cabin!" Nora straightened, shielding her eyes as if just noticing him. "Hello there," she returned, keeping her voice steady. "Beg pardon, ma'am," the rider said, approaching at a walk now. "Got caught in the storm yesterday. Mighty glad to see smoke from your chimney. Might I trouble you for some coffee and directions?" His smile didn't reach his eyes, which darted continuously between Nora and the cabin behind her, searching for anything amiss. "Of course," she answered, matching his false friendliness. "Always happy to help a traveler. Though I'm afraid I'm not much company. Been alone here since my husband passed." The rider dismounted, keeping a careful distance. "Sorry to hear that, ma'am. Been on your own long?" 2 years this spring," Nora replied, moving toward the door. "Please, tie your horse and come in from the cold." As the man secured his mount to the hitching post, Nora slipped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Altaha had already hidden himself, where she couldn't tell, but the main room appeared empty. "Keep him talking," came a whisper from somewhere near the storage nook. "Learn what he knows." Nora had barely nodded when the door opened again, and the stranger stepped inside, removing his hat with an exaggerated show of manners. "Mighty kind of you, ma'am. Name's John Smith." The obviously false name hung in the air between them. "Nora McKenna," she replied, moving to the stove. "Coffee's just about ready." The man called Smith made a show of warming his hands by the fire, all while his eyes methodically scanned the cabin. They paused briefly on the blood-stained rags Nora had forgotten to hide, then moved to the pallet where Altaha had lain. "Live far from your neighbors, Ms. McKenna?" he asked casually. "Far enough," she answered, her back to him as she reached for cups. "Nearest homestead's about 3 miles, though they've been gone a while now." "Dangerous country for a woman alone," Smith remarked. "Indians and outlaws about." "I manage." Nora turned, 2 cups in hand, to find Smith no longer by the fire, but moving slowly around the room, examining her belongings. "Husband leave you well provided for, did he?" His tone had shifted, the pretense of politeness wearing thin. "Just this cabin and what's in it," Nora replied carefully. "Nothing of value to anyone but me." Smith's gaze fell on the cabinet where she kept her few treasures, including the blue stone. "Sometimes folks don't know the value of what they have. Might be worth having someone take a look at your husband's effects. For your benefit, of course." The threat beneath the offer was unmistakable. "My husband's effects are private," Nora said, her voice hardening. "And I believe your coffee is getting cold, Mr. Smith." Something ugly flashed across his face, and his hand moved toward his gun. "Now that ain't very hospitable, Ms. McKenna, especially when I've ridden all this way specific to see you." Before Nora could reach for her own weapon, a shadow detached itself from the darkened corner of the cabin. In one fluid motion, Altaha was behind Smith, a knife pressed to the man's throat. "I would reconsider," Altaha said softly, the blade drawing a bead of blood as Smith froze in terror. "Apache!" Smith gasped, his face draining of color. "Not just any Apache," Nora found herself saying, an unexpected calm flowing through her as she picked up her rifle. "You're looking at Altaha himself." Smith's eyes widened in genuine fear. "That's impossible. He wouldn't protect a white woman?" Altaha finished for him. "Perhaps you understand less than you think." The knife pressed slightly deeper. "Now tell us, how many ride with Crawford, and when do they come?" For a moment it seemed Smith might refuse. Then Altaha shifted his grip, and whatever the man saw in those dark eyes broke his resistance. 15 men, he stammered. "Crawford sent me ahead to confirm the woman was still here and alone. They're camped 10 miles east, waiting for my signal. If I don't return by nightfall, they'll come anyway, assuming trouble." "And the stone?" Altaha pressed. "What does Crawford know of it?" Smith's eyes darted to Nora, then back to Altaha. "He knows the woman's husband found it near the sacred mountain. Knows it matches the map his Apache guide drew before dying. Says it will lead to gold beyond counting, if we can find the rest of it." "The rest?" Nora interrupted. "There's more than one piece?" Smith nodded as much as the knife would allow. "Crawford has one piece already. Needs at least one more to complete the map. Said the husband might have hidden it somewhere on this property." Altaha and Nora exchanged glances. If Crawford already had part of whatever this sacred stone was, and needed what James had found, what did that mean for them? "What does he plan for the woman?" Altaha asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Smith's silence was damning. "I see," Altaha said quietly. "Then you understand why you cannot leave this place." Fear flooded Smith's eyes. "Wait, I can help you. Crawford doesn't trust me, keeps me scouting because I'm expendable. I could bring false information, buy you time." "Lie to me again," Altaha cut him off, "and your death will be slower. The knife at your belt is army issue, but with notches carved by your own hand. 7 of them. You're no reluctant scout. You're a killer." Smith's face twisted in rage, his pretense falling away. "And what are you, Indian? I heard the stories, the ranches you've burnt, the settlers you've slaughtered." "I have killed warriors in battle," Altaha replied evenly. "Never women. Never children. Can you say the same?" The man's silence was its own confession. Nora stepped forward, her rifle aimed squarely at Smith's chest. "You have a choice to make, Mr. Smith. A quick death here, or you can ride back with a message." Altaha shot her a warning look, but Nora continued. "Tell Crawford I know what he's looking for. Tell him I'll trade the stone for my safety and the deed to this land. Tell him to come alone at noon tomorrow, or I'll destroy what he seeks." Smith's eyes narrowed in calculation. And why would he believe that? Because you'll bring him this. Nora reached into her pocket and withdrew a small turquoise chip she'd broken from the original stone that morning. Insurance, she'd told herself, never expecting to use it so soon. Proof that I have what he wants. Altaha's expression remained unreadable, but the pressure of his knife eased slightly. Smith's eyes fixed hungrily on the small blue fragment. Crawford doesn't negotiate, he warned. Once he knows for sure you have it, he'll come anyway, Nora finished. But this way, we choose the time and place. We. Smith's gaze flicked between them. The great Altaha protecting a white woman? What would your warriors say? Something dangerous flashed in Altaha's eyes. The woman stands against those who have wronged both our peoples. That makes her worthy of protection. The simple declaration, spoken with such certainty, sent an unexpected warmth through Nora's chest. Not trust, she wasn't ready for that, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps. So, she pressed, will you take our message, or shall we end this now? Smith's survival instinct finally won out over his hatred. I'll take it, but Crawford won't come alone, message or no. We're counting on that, Nora replied with more confidence than she felt. Minutes later, they watched from the window as Smith galloped away, the small turquoise chip secured in his pocket along with their challenge. As his figure disappeared into the distance, the gravity of what they'd done settled over them. He'll bring them all, Altaha said quietly, leaning heavily against the wall, his wounds clearly paining him from the exertion. I know, Nora replied, helping him back to the pallet despite his resistance. But now we have until noon tomorrow to prepare, instead of being ambushed tonight. Altaha studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You surprise me, Nora McKenna. Most would have tried to run. There's nowhere to run to, she said simply. This cabin is all I have left. I won't abandon it to men like Crawford, even if it cost your life. My life stopped the day they killed James, she answered, the words emerging before she could consider them. All that's left is surviving, and perhaps making them pay. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Altaha reached out, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment, a gesture of understanding that transcended words. Tomorrow, he said, we will do more than survive. For the first time in 2 years, Nora felt something other than grief or emptiness stir within her. It wasn't hope, she wasn't ready for that, but it was purpose. And as her eyes met Altaha's, she realized with startling clarity that neither of them expected to live beyond the coming confrontation. They were already dead in their own ways. She a widow, clinging to memory. He a warrior who had lost everything that gave his battles meaning. All that remained was ensuring their enemies joined them in that fate. Yet even as this grim understanding passed between them, something else flickered in the space they shared, a connection neither had sought, born of shared loss and unexpected recognition of themselves in each other. Dangerous, unwelcome, yet undeniably present. Rest, Nora told him, breaking the moment. You'll need your strength. As she turned away to begin preparations for tomorrow's confrontation, Nora felt Altaha's eyes following her, seeing too much, understanding things about her she barely acknowledged herself. Outside, the winter sun shone brilliantly on the snow-covered landscape, beautiful and merciless. By tomorrow night that pristine whiteness would be stained with blood. Hers, Altaha's, Crawford's. It made little difference. All that mattered was ensuring the right people paid for what had been taken from them both. As dusk gathered around the cabin, Nora found herself watching Altaha clean his knife with methodical precision. His movements were economical, practiced, a warrior's rituals before battle. Despite his wounds, which would have kept most men bedridden, he'd spent the afternoon helping her prepare defenses for tomorrow's confrontation. You should eat, she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly an hour. Altaha nodded without looking up, the blade gleaming in the firelight as he tested its edge. Soon, Nora busied herself ladling stew into bowls. They'd spent the day transforming her simple homestead into a fortress of sorts, moving furniture to create barricades, setting tripwires outside that would alert them to approach, identifying escape routes, preparing weapons. Through it all, they had worked in a strange harmony, anticipating each other's thoughts, complementing each other's strengths. Nora knew the cabin and surrounding terrain. Altaha understood Crawford's tactics and men. Together, they might stand a chance, slim though it was. "Here," she said, offering him a bowl. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and once again that peculiar warmth traveled up her arm. This time, she didn't pull away quite so quickly. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. Questions burned in Nora's mind, but she hesitated to voice them, as if speaking might shatter the fragile understanding they'd established. Finally, Altaha broke the silence. "You want to know why Crawford hunts this stone so desperately?" It wasn't a question. Nora looked up to find him watching her, those penetrating eyes seeming to read her thoughts. "James never mentioned finding anything valuable," she said. "He wasn't interested in gold or riches. We came here to build a life, not chase fortunes." Altaha set his empty bowl aside. "The turquoise from Zil Naudili is valued by my people not for what it can find, but for what it represents. Connection to the earth, to the sky, to all living things. But men like Crawford see only what lies beneath." "Gold," Nora surmised. "More than gold. The mountain hides deposits of gold unlike any found before. Pure, abundant, accessible once you know the way. My ancestors discovered it generations ago, but chose to keep it hidden, knowing what such wealth would bring." His expression darkened. "They were right to fear." He rose with a slight wince and moved to the window, peering out at the gathering darkness. "Crawford learned of it while commanding Fort Bowie. He questioned Apache prisoners until one revealed the secret of the turquoise map." The way he said "questioned" told Nora everything about what those prisoners had endured. "The sacred stone was broken into 3 pieces long ago, hidden by 3 different guardians," Altaha continued. "Together they show the way through the canyon maze to the gold deposits. Crawford has obtained 1 piece already, taken from the body of an elder he murdered. The 2nd piece was hidden near your husband's hunting grounds." "And the 3rd?" Nora asked. Altaha turned to face her, his expression grave. "The 3rd was protected by my wife's family. It was what Crawford sought when he raided my village." Understanding dawned on Nora with sickening clarity. "That's why he killed your family, for a piece of turquoise." "For what it could lead to," Altaha corrected, though the distinction hardly mattered. "My wife died without revealing its location. My son," his voice faltered almost imperceptibly. "My son was only 4 winters." The naked grief in his eyes struck Nora like a physical blow. Here was a man the entire territory feared, the phantom who led devastating raids against military outposts, who had become legend among both settlers and natives, laid bare by memory. Without thinking, she crossed to him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "I'm sorry." Altaha looked down at her hand on his skin, then met her gaze with an intensity that stole her breath. "As am I for your husband." Something passed between them in that moment, understanding deeper than words, recognition of shared wounds that might never heal. Nora became acutely aware of how close they stood, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, of how long it had been since she'd touched another human being with anything other than clinical necessity. She withdrew her hand, unsettled by her own reaction. "We should finish preparing." If Altaha noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. Instead, he moved to where his few possessions lay beside the pallet where he'd rested. "There is something you should have," he said, retrieving a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. "For tomorrow." Curiosity overcame her hesitation. Nora accepted the bundle and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a knife unlike any she'd seen before, shorter than a hunting knife, with a curved blade of unusual design and a handle wrapped in intricately braided leather. "It's called a karambit," Altaha explained. "From islands far across the ocean. A trader brought it to our territories years ago. It is designed to be held like this." He demonstrated, the curved blade extending from his closed fist like a tiger's claw. Even someone without great strength can cause significant damage, and it can be hidden easily. Nora tested the weight of it in her hand, adapting to its unusual shape. "Why give me this?" "Because tomorrow you may need to fight in ways your rifle cannot help with." His gaze was steady on hers. "And because I would not see you defenseless if I fall." The simple honesty of his words struck her. This man, this enemy she'd been taught to fear and hate, was preparing for his own death with the same quiet dignity he seemed to bring to everything. "I'm not defenseless," Nora said, but she slipped the knife into her boot nonetheless. And you're not going to fall tomorrow. A hint of a smile touched Altaha's lips. Now who speaks with certainty about things beyond their control? Despite herself, Nora felt an answering smile tug at her mouth, the first in longer than she could remember. It felt strange, almost foreign, like a muscle long unused. The moment was broken by a sound outside, the distant snap of a branch beneath weight. Instantly, both of them tensed, Altaha moving to the window while Nora reached for her rifle. "There," he whispered, pointing to a shadow among the trees at the edge of her clearing. "One man? Watching?" Nora peered through the darkness. Crawford couldn't have gotten Smith's message yet. "Not Crawford," Altaha agreed. "A scout, left behind when the first one didn't return quickly enough, watching to see what happened." "What do we do?" Altaha considered for a moment. "Let him watch. Let him see a cabin with a woman alone, preparing for night. Let him believe his companion never arrived." Nora understood immediately. "So he reports back that nothing is unusual, and they stick to their original plan." "Exactly. It may buy us more time." With quiet efficiency, they extinguished all but one lamp and rearranged the room to hide any evidence of Altaha's presence or their preparations. Nora moved about the cabin as she would on any normal evening, hanging a kettle over the fire, closing shutters, creating the illusion of solitary routine while always keeping the hidden watcher in her peripheral vision. Altaha concealed himself in the shadows, so still he seemed to disappear entirely, though Nora remained acutely aware of his presence. After what felt like hours, the shadow among the trees finally retreated. He's gone," Altaha confirmed, materializing beside her with such silence that Nora startled despite herself. "Back to report to Crawford." "Will he have seen enough to convince them?" Nora asked. "We will know tomorrow." Altaha returned to the window, scanning the darkness beyond. "You should sleep. I will keep watch." Nora shook her head. "Your wounds need rest more than I do." "My wounds are healing," he countered, "and I require less sleep than you might think." "We'll take turns," she insisted. 4 hours each, and I'll go first." Altaha studied her for a moment, then inclined his head in acceptance of the compromise. "Wake me at midnight, then." As he settled onto the pallet near the fire, Nora took up position by the window, rifle across her lap. The night stretched dark and silent around the cabin, stars brilliant in the clear sky above the pines. Her thoughts drifted to James, what he would think of her now, preparing to fight alongside an Apache warrior against white men. Would he understand, or would he see it as betrayal of everything they'd believed when they first came to this frontier? "He was a good man." Altaha's voice came softly from the darkness, as if he'd read her thoughts. "Your husband?" Nora turned, surprised to find him still awake, watching her with those penetrating eyes. "How would you know that?" "I observed him several times from a distance." At her startled expression, he continued, "My people watch all who enter our territories. Your husband hunted with respect, took only what he needed, left offerings of tobacco. These are the actions of a good man." The revelation that Altaha had seen James, perhaps many times while remaining unseen himself, was unsettling. Yet it was the thought that this warrior had judged her husband's character and found it worthy that brought an unexpected lump to Nora's throat. Were you watching the day they came?" she asked, the question that had haunted her for 2 years finally finding voice. Altaha's expression grew somber. "No. I found the aftermath 3 days later, while tracking Crawford's men for other reasons. Your husband fought bravely. He did not die easily." Tears burned behind Nora's eyes. No one had been able to tell her exactly what had happened that day. She'd returned from trading at the fort to find her world destroyed, James's body already cold. Did he suffer? The question escaped before she could stop it. Altaha held her gaze steadily. "He died protecting what he valued. There is honor in such an end." Not a direct answer, but perhaps the kindest one possible. Nora nodded, accepting both what he said and what he didn't. "And your wife?" she asked softly. "Your son." Pain flashed across his features, quickly controlled but unmistakable. "Nahimana died with a warrior's heart, protecting our child until the end. Kemi," his voice caught on the name. "They found him hiding beneath the furs where she had placed him." The brutal simplicity of it struck Nora like a physical blow. Not just a wife and child, names, individuals, loved beyond measure and lost in violence, just as senseless as what had taken James. "Crawford will pay," she said. The words a promise rather than a threat. "For all of them." Altaha studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Revenge will not bring them back." "I know that," Nora replied. "But justice might help them rest." "Justice," he echoed, the word carrying weight in his mouth. "Is that what we seek tomorrow? Or merely blood?" The question lingered between them, unanswered. Finally, Altaha closed his eyes. "Wake me at midnight." "And Nora McKenna?" "Yes? Your husband would be proud of the warrior you have become." The words followed her through her watch, warming places inside her that had been cold for too long. Outside, the night deepened toward its darkest hour, and somewhere beyond the pines, Crawford and his men prepared to descend upon her cabin. But for the first time in 2 years, Nora didn't feel entirely alone. When midnight came, she found herself reluctant to wake Altaha, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the proud features relaxed in sleep. Only when she caught herself reaching to brush a strand of hair from his face did she pull back, disturbed by her own impulse. "Altaha," she called softly, keeping a safe distance. "It's midnight." He woke instantly, fully alert in a way that spoke of years lived in danger. Their hands brushed as they exchanged positions, and once again that curious warmth traveled up her arm. This time, Nora was certain he felt it too. A slight widening of his eyes, a momentary stillness before he moved to take her place by the window. "Sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Dawn comes quickly." Nora settled onto the pallet he'd vacated, still warm from his body. Sleep seemed impossible with her mind racing through tomorrow's dangers, yet exhaustion soon pulled her under. Her last conscious thought was the realization that the pillow carried Altaha's scent, cedar, smoke, and something uniquely him, and that she found it oddly comforting. She dreamed of James for the first time in months, not his death, but his life, his smile as he'd built their cabin, his hands gentle on hers as he'd taught her to shoot. In the dream, he stood at the edge of a canyon, pointing towards something she couldn't see. "It was never about the stone, Nora," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "It was always about finding a way home." She woke with a start to find early dawn light filtering through the cabin windows, and Altaha kneeling beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "They're coming," he said simply. Reality crashed back with brutal force. Nora rose quickly, pushing the dream aside as she moved to the window. In the pale morning light, she could just make out riders, at least a dozen, moving through the trees at the eastern edge of her property. "Earlier than noon," she observed, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Crawford never intended to honor your terms," Altaha said, checking his weapons with swift efficiency, "but neither did we expect him to." Their eyes met in shared understanding. Whatever happened in the coming hours, there would be no retreat, no surrender. For both of them, this confrontation had been set in motion long before they'd met. Perhaps from the moment James found a piece of turquoise, or Altaha's wife refused to reveal its secret. "Are you ready?" Altaha asked, offering her the rifle he'd loaded for her. Nora took it, feeling the solid weight in her hands. "Yes." The Apache warrior nodded once, respect clear in his eyes. "Then let us meet our enemies, Nora McKenna. Together." As the riders drew closer, Nora felt a strange calm settle over her. 2 years of grief and isolation had led to this moment, standing beside a man who should have been her enemy, but instead had become something she had no name for. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same dignity she saw in him, and perhaps at last find a way to honor all they had lost. The riders halted at the edge of the clearing, just beyond rifle range. Nora counted 15 men, heavily armed, with Crawford himself easy to identify at their center, a tall figure with a gray beard and the rigid posture of a former military officer. "They're trying to decide how to approach," Altaha said from his position at the side window. "Crawford is cautious. He suspects a trap." "Good," Nora replied, checking her rifle one final time. "Let him worry." They had spent the pre-dawn hours making final preparations, setting deadfalls along the most likely approach routes, positioning weapons for easy access, creating false targets to draw fire. Altaha's wounds, while not fully healed, no longer hindered his movement significantly, and there was a deadly grace to his every motion that reminded Nora just why this man was feared throughout the territory. "He's sending 2 men forward," Altaha reported, his voice betraying no emotion. "The rest are spreading out to surround the cabin." Their original plan called for Nora to appear alone, maintaining the illusion that nothing was amiss. But with Crawford arriving early and already deploying his men for attack, that strategy was no longer viable. "Change of plans," she decided. "We don't wait for them to surround us." Altaha nodded in agreement. "We draw them in, take as many as we can, then break through their eastern flank while they're disorganized." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. 15 against 2 were impossible odds no matter how they approached it. The 2 lead riders approached slowly, rifles across their saddles. One was Smith, the scout from yesterday, his face twisted in a mixture of triumph and anxiety. The other was a younger man with cold eyes and a cavalry lieutenant's coat stripped of its insignia. "Mrs. McKenna," Smith called when they were 30 yards out. "Major Crawford requests your presence for a discussion about our arrangement." Nora exchanged a glance with Altaha, who had positioned himself where he could strike without being seen from outside. "Tell Crawford if he wants to talk, he can come himself," she shouted back. "I don't deal with messengers." Smith and his companion conferred briefly. Then the younger man turned his horse and galloped back to the main group. Smith remained where he was, his hand resting conspicuously on his holstered pistol. "Crawford's coming himself," Altaha warned, his voice low. "Be prepared. He will likely try to enter the cabin to search for the stone." "Good," Nora said grimly. "Let him come." Minutes later, Crawford approached on a large black horse, flanked by Smith and 2 other men. He cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered despite his age, with calculating eyes that missed nothing. Nora could easily imagine him commanding troops or interrogating prisoners until they broke. "Mrs. McKenna," he called, his voice carrying the remnants of an Eastern education, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Nora stepped into the doorway, rifle held casually but ready. "Nothing here belongs to you, Crawford. This is my land. Land you can't possibly hold alone," he countered smoothly. "I'm prepared to offer you safe passage to the nearest settlement. All I require is what your husband took from me." "James never took anything from you," Nora replied, letting her genuine anger fuel her words. "He was an honest man." Crawford's expression hardened. "The blue stone, Mrs. McKenna. I know you have it. Smith delivered your message and your sample. I'm here as requested, though I notice you've chosen to start our meeting early." "You brought 15 armed men," Nora observed coldly. "That hardly seems like a good-faith negotiation." "These are dangerous territories." Crawford dismounted with the ease of a much younger man. "Now shall we discuss terms inside like civilized people, or would you prefer to continue this conversation with guns drawn?" It was a trap, of course. Crawford wanted inside the cabin to search for the stone, and to get Nora alone away from potential witnesses, but it was also their best chance to eliminate him before his men could intervene. "Fine," she agreed, stepping back from the doorway. "You alone, Crawford. Your men stay outside." Crawford smiled thinly and handed his reins to Smith. "I won't be long," he told his men, striding confidently toward the cabin. As he passed through the doorway, Nora caught a glimpse of something blue at his throat, a piece of turquoise on a leather cord, partially hidden by his collar, the first piece of the sacred stone. The door closed behind him, and Crawford's eyes swept the cabin's interior, no doubt searching for signs of the stone, or traps. They widened fractionally as they fell on the blood-stained rags Nora had deliberately left visible. "You're not alone," he stated, rather than asked, his hand moving to his gun. "No," Altaha's voice came from behind him. "She is not." Crawford spun, impressively fast for his age, but Altaha was faster. The Apache warrior stepped from the shadows, knife in hand, positioning himself between Crawford and the door. "Altaha," Crawford breathed, recognition and disbelief mingling in his expression. "My men said they'd killed you." "Your men lie," Altaha replied evenly, "as do you, Crawford." The former major recovered his composure quickly, his hand moving away from his weapon in a show of temporary surrender. "This is unexpected. The great Altaha, defending a white woman? Times have certainly changed." "We defend what is ours," Nora interjected, keeping her rifle trained on Crawford's chest. "And seek justice for those you've murdered." A calculating look entered Crawford's eyes as they darted between Nora and Altaha. "I see. You've compared notes, found common cause against me." His gaze settled on Altaha. "Tell me, does she know the full truth about your wife? About why I really came to your village that day?" Altaha's expression remained impassive, but Nora sensed a tension in him that hadn't been there before. "Your lies won't help you now." Crawford smiled coldly. "No lies. Just facts you've chosen to omit. Like the fact that your wife wasn't Apache at all, but a white woman, a settler's daughter who chose your bed over her own people." The revelation hit Nora like a physical blow. She glanced at Altaha, whose face betrayed nothing, yet whose silence confirmed Crawford's words. "Nahimana was my wife," Altaha said finally, his voice tightly controlled. "Her people were mine. That is all that matters." "It mattered to her father," Crawford pressed, clearly sensing an advantage. "Enough that he paid me handsomely to retrieve his daughter and grandson from what he called a savage's captivity." "Lies," Altaha said, but there was a new edge to his voice. "Edward Green disowned his daughter the day she chose to stay with my people. He would never have sent for her." "Perhaps not while he lived," Crawford agreed, "but men often have changes of heart on their deathbeds. He wanted to see his grandson before he passed, to offer the boy his rightful inheritance." Nora watched Altaha's face, seeing the conflict there despite his efforts to hide it. "Don't listen to him," she urged. "He's trying to divide us." Crawford turned his attention to her. "And you, Mrs. McKenna, has your Apache friend told you why your husband really died? What he really found that day?" "The stone," Nora said firmly. "Nothing more." "Oh, much more," Crawford corrected. "Your husband stumbled upon something even more valuable than the turquoise. He found Altaha's son, alive and hiding in the canyons after our raid." The world seemed to stop around Nora. She looked to Altaha, whose face had gone completely still, a warrior's mask hiding whatever storm raged beneath. "My son died in our village," Altaha said, each word precise and dangerous. "By your hand." "A child died," Crawford conceded with chilling indifference. "Not yours. A decoy your wife left to trick us while she escaped with your true son. A clever woman, your Nahimana. She nearly succeeded." Altaha's control slipped for just an instant, revealing such raw hope and anguish that Nora's heart contracted painfully in her chest. "If this is another lie, ask your new friend," Crawford suggested, gesturing toward Nora. "Ask her what her husband was really doing with that blue stone. Ask her about the cave where he was hiding them both." Nora shook her head, genuine confusion overriding her suspicion of Crawford's tactics. "James never mentioned any child. He found the stone while hunting, nothing more." "The stone was payment," Crawford said. "From Nahimana to your husband, for protecting her son until she could return for him. But your James got greedy, Mrs. McKenna. Started asking questions about what made this particular piece of turquoise so valuable. That's when my men found him." The story was outlandish, impossible, yet Nora found herself unable to dismiss it entirely. James had been acting strangely in the days before his death. Secretive, making trips to the eastern canyons and returning late, offering vague explanations. "If my son lives," Altaha said, his voice barely controlled, "where is he now?" Crawford's smile was cold triumph. "That's why I need the stone, isn't it? To complete the map. The boy is with what remains of your people, hidden in the canyon maze beyond the sacred mountain. Find one, and you'll find the other." For a terrible moment, Nora thought Altaha might lower his weapon, might actually consider Crawford's implicit offer, the stone for information about his son. The pain and desperate hope in his eyes were almost unbearable to witness. "Altaha," she said softly, "he's lying. He has to be." The Apache warrior's eyes found hers, and in them she saw not just grief and hope, but a question. Did she know? Had James kept this secret from her? Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouts followed by the crack of a rifle shot. Crawford's men growing impatient or suspicious. "Time's up," Crawford said, his hand moving to his gun with practiced speed. Everything happened at once. Altaha lunged forward as Crawford drew his pistol. Nora fired her rifle, the shot going wide as Crawford twisted away. The former major's gun barked once, twice, the bullet splintering wood as Altaha tackled him to the floor. The two men grappled with lethal intent, Crawford's military training against Altaha's raw power and speed. Despite his wounds, the Apache warrior gained the upper hand, pinning Crawford beneath him, knife raised for the killing blow. "Wait," Crawford gasped. "Your son lives. Kill me and you'll never find him." Altaha hesitated just for an instant. It was enough. Crawford surged upward, throwing the warrior off balance. They rolled across the floor, each fighting for the advantage. Outside, more shots rang out. Crawford's men were attacking. Nora aimed at the struggling figures, trying to find a clean shot at Crawford, but they moved too quickly, too entangled. The door burst open, and Smith rushed in, gun drawn. Nora swung her rifle toward him and fired without hesitation. The scout crumpled, dead before he hit the floor. The momentary distraction cost her. As she turned back to help Altaha, she found Crawford on his feet, bleeding from a slash across his face, but very much alive, and holding his pistol to Altaha's head. The Apache warrior knelt before him, dazed from a blow to the temple. "Drop the rifle, Mrs. McKenna," Crawford ordered, "or watch your savage friend die right now." Nora hesitated, the rifle steady in her hands. She could shoot Crawford, probably would hit him at this range, but not before he could pull the trigger and kill Altaha. "He's using you," Crawford continued, "just as he used your husband. The great Altaha doesn't care about white settlers. He's killed dozens. He's only here because he believes you can lead him to his son." "That's not true," Altaha said, his voice strained but firm. "Nora, don't listen." Crawford struck him with the pistol barrel, drawing blood. "Silence!" Outside, the gunfire had intensified. Crawford's men were engaged with someone. But who? They had no allies nearby. Understanding dawned in Altaha's eyes. At the same moment, Nora realized the truth. "Apache," he said, a fierce pride entering his voice despite his position. "My warriors have come." Crawford's expression hardened. "It changes nothing. We don't have time for this." He turned to Nora. "The stone. Now. Or he dies, and you follow." Nora's mind raced. Apache warriors outside meant they might actually survive this, if they could eliminate Crawford first. But the former major's gun remained steadily pressed against Altaha's temple. "The stone isn't here," she lied. "It's hidden. I'm the only one who knows where." "Then you'll take me to it," Crawford snarled. "Move!" Altaha caught her eye, a silent message passing between them. "Stall. Wait for the right moment." "It's not that simple," Nora insisted. "It's in a cave system. If you kill either of us, you'll never find your way through." Crawford's jaw tightened in frustration. Outside, one of his men screamed, a sound cut terribly short. "We're leaving," he decided. "All three of us. You'll take me to the stone or watch your Apache lover die inch by inch. Your choice, Mrs. McKenna." Lover. The word hung in the air between them, both false and strangely resonant. Nora had no time to examine the uncomfortable flutter it caused in her chest. "Fine," she agreed, lowering her rifle slightly. "I'll take you to it. But first—" Her eyes flicked to Altaha's. "First, I need to know if what you said about James is true." Crawford's impatience was palpable, but he understood the value of the leverage he'd discovered. "Your husband found the boy and the woman hiding in a cave near the Eastern Canyon. He agreed to help them, for a price. When the woman couldn't pay what he demanded, he kept the boy as insurance." "James would never—" Nora began, but Crawford cut her off. "Everyone has their price, Mrs. McKenna. Your husband's was the promise of gold. He wasn't the first to succumb to it, and he won't be the last." Nora looked to Altaha, whose eyes held no condemnation, only a question he couldn't voice with Crawford's gun against his head. "Do you believe him?" Before she could answer, a war cry shattered the morning, close, just outside the cabin. Crawford jerked toward the sound, his gun moving fractionally away from Altaha's head. It was all the opening the warrior needed. Altaha struck with blinding speed, one hand knocking the gun aside as his other drove upward into Crawford's midsection. The pistol discharged, the bullet tearing into the ceiling as both men crashed to the floor. Nora raised her rifle, seeking a clear shot, but the fighting was too chaotic, too close. Instead, she remembered the curved knife in her boot, Altaha's gift. Drawing it, she circled the struggling men, looking for an opening. Crawford was stronger than his age suggested, fueled by desperation and greed. He managed to slam Altaha against the wall, dazing him, and lunged for his fallen pistol. Nora didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, The karambit extended from her fist just as Altaha had shown her, and slashed at Crawford's reaching arm. The curved blade cut deep, severing tendons. Crawford howled in pain and rage, whirling toward her with murderous intent. "You'll die for that, woman!" He charged her, wounded but still dangerous. Nora stood her ground, knife ready, fear and determination coursing through her in equal measure, but Crawford never reached her. Altaha recovered with warrior's instinct, tackling the former major from behind. They crashed into the table, sending it splintering beneath their weight. When they rose, Altaha held his own knife to Crawford's throat, and around the former officer's neck, the leather cord with its piece of turquoise had been torn free. "Your men are dying outside," Altaha said, his voice deadly calm. "And now you will join them, unless you tell me the truth about my son." Crawford's eyes darted between Altaha and the door, calculating his chances. Finding none, a strange calm seemed to settle over him. "The truth?" he said, blood dripping from his slashed arm. "The truth is, your woman died protecting a secret that was never worth her life. There was no second child, no survivor. I invented the story to divide you two, and clearly it almost worked." Nora saw the impact of the words hit Altaha like a physical blow. Hope raised, and then brutally extinguished. His grip on the knife tightened, pressing deep enough to draw blood from Crawford's throat. "For that lie alone, you deserve death," Altaha said, his voice rough with controlled grief. "Wait," Nora interrupted, a memory surfacing, James's strange behavior, his secretiveness. "The cave. Was there really a cave?" Crawford's eyes narrowed. "East Canyon. 3 miles from here. Your husband used it as a hideout. That's where he kept the stone, and other treasures he didn't want you to know about." A crash from outside interrupted them, the sound of the front door being kicked open. Altaha didn't turn, keeping his knife pressed to Crawford's throat, even as Apache warriors poured into the cabin. 3 men entered, tall, fierce, painted for war, and armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and captured firearms. They took in the scene with quick, assessing glances, their expressions changing to reverence when they recognized their leader. "Altaha," the foremost warrior said in Apache, then continued in a stream of words Nora couldn't understand. Altaha responded in the same language, his eyes never leaving Crawford. The warriors spread out, securing the cabin with practiced efficiency. "Your men are dead," Altaha informed Crawford in English, presumably for Nora's benefit. "My warriors followed them from their camp, waiting for the right moment to strike." Fear finally broke through Crawford's composure. "You can't just kill me," he protested. "The army will hunt you all down." "The army believes you're dead already," Altaha replied. "Killed in a border raid months ago. No one will come looking for a ghost." Crawford's eyes darted desperately to Nora. "Mrs. McKenna, you're a Christian woman. You can't let him execute me in cold blood." Nora thought of James, dying alone while she was away at the fort, of Altaha's wife and child, murdered in their home, of the 2 years she'd spent in grief and isolation because of men like Crawford. "My husband died because of your greed," she said quietly. "I won't weep for your passing." Something changed in Crawford's expression then, desperation giving way to a cold, final defiance. "Then do it," he challenged Altaha. "Prove you're the savage they say you are. Prove that everything they fear about your kind is true." For a moment, Nora thought Altaha would indeed cut Crawford's throat. The knife pressed deeper, drawing a thin line of blood. Then, to her surprise, Altaha lowered the blade. "Death would be too simple," he said, his voice laden with contempt. "Too quick for what you deserve." He spoke rapidly in Apache to his warriors, who nodded in grim understanding. 2 of them seized Crawford, binding his hands tightly behind his back. "What are you doing?" Crawford demanded, panic edging his voice as they dragged him toward the door. Altaha retrieved the turquoise pendant from the floor where it had fallen and held it up to catch the light. "You sought the sacred stone's secrets," he said. "Now you will have a lifetime to contemplate them, from inside the prison of your own making." Understanding dawned in Crawford's eyes, followed by naked terror. "No, you can't." "The abandoned mine shaft where you questioned our prisoners," Altaha continued relentlessly. "Deep enough that no one will hear you. Stocked with enough water to keep you alive for many days. Time enough to remember every life you've taken." That's murder," Crawford gasped as the warriors pulled him outside. "No," Altaha corrected. It's justice. As Crawford's protests faded into the distance, Nora found herself alone with Altaha and one remaining warrior, who stood respectfully by the door, awaiting instructions. Your people came for you, she said softly, unsure what else to say in the aftermath of such violence. They followed my trail when I did not return, Altaha confirmed. They are loyal. An awkward silence fell between them. With Crawford gone and the immediate danger past, the fragile connection that had formed between them in the face of a common enemy seemed suddenly uncertain. Was any of it true? Nora finally asked. About my husband? About your son? Altaha's expression softened slightly. Crawford is a skilled liar. He knows how to weave truth with falsehood to create doubt where none should exist. That's not an answer. The warrior sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from someone who had seemed almost mythical at times. My son died in our village. Of this, I am certain. My wife died protecting him, but... He hesitated. Nahimana was indeed born to white settlers. She chose our ways when she was 16 summers, and never looked back. Her father did disown her, as I said. Nora absorbed this, trying to imagine the woman who had made such a choice, who had crossed boundaries of culture and prejudice for love, only to die protecting the family she'd created. And James? She pressed. The cave? Altaha's gaze was steady on hers. Your husband may have found the stone, as Crawford said, in a cave where others had hidden it, but I do not believe he was the man Crawford described. A man who builds a home like this, who treats the land with respect, such a man does not betray others for gold. His simple faith in James's character touched Nora deeply, coming as it did from someone who had every reason to think the worst of white settlers. Thank you, she said softly. Altaha nodded, then turned to the warrior at the door, speaking rapidly in Apache. The man responded, then slipped outside, leaving them truly alone for the first time since the fighting began. My people will ensure Crawford never troubles anyone again, Altaha said, moving to gather his few possessions. They will also watch over you until... He paused. Until you decide what you wish to do next. Nora realized with a jolt that he was preparing to leave. Now that the danger had passed, now that justice had been served, there was no reason for him to stay. They were, after all, from different worlds, worlds that had been at war for generations. Yet the thought of returning to her solitary existence after these intense days together filled her with unexpected emptiness. The stone, she said, more to delay his departure than anything else. What will happen to it now? Altaha touched the turquoise pendant he had taken from Crawford. This piece will be returned to my people, the one your husband found. He looked at her questioningly. Nora crossed to the cabinet and retrieved the blue stone she had kept hidden. It seemed to glow in the morning light, veins of darker blue tracing patterns that might indeed match waterways leading to hidden gold. It's yours, she said, holding it out to him. It always was. Altaha accepted it with solemn gravity, their fingers brushing during the exchange. That same warmth traveled between them, no longer shocking but somehow familiar. Thank you, he said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Nora McKenna, what will you do now? It was a question she hadn't allowed herself to consider. For 2 years, survival had been her only goal. Each day a struggle to continue existing after James's death had robbed her life of purpose. Now, standing in the aftermath of violence with the man who had shown her she could still fight, still feel, she found herself without an answer. I don't know, she admitted. This cabin is all I have left. Altaha studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes seeing far too much. There is a place, he said carefully, at the edge of my people's territory, where the mountains meet the desert, land that belongs to no one and everyone. Some of our people live there, those who walk between worlds, those who, like my wife, have chosen a different path. Nora's heart quickened at his words. Was he suggesting what she thought? Nahimana established a small trading post there before... He paused, swallowing past what was clearly still painful memory. It stands empty now. The land is good. Water runs clean. It would suit someone who knows both worlds, someone with courage and honor. Their eyes met, and in his, Nora saw something she hadn't dared acknowledge before, respect that had deepened into something more complex, more personal, something that reflected the confusing warmth that had been growing in her own heart. "Are you asking me to leave my home?" she asked, needing to be certain of his meaning. Altaha shook his head slightly. "I am offering you a choice. To remain here, alone, with memories of what was lost, or to build something new in a place where you might find—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. Peace, purpose, perhaps more. The implications hung in the air between them. This proud warrior, who had every reason to hate white settlers, was offering her a place among his people, or at least at their borders. And perhaps, though he didn't say it directly, a place in his life as well. "What about your people?" Nora asked. "They would never accept a white woman living among them." "They accepted Nahimana," Altaha countered. "They would accept anyone I—" He stopped himself, then continued more carefully. "Anyone who proved themselves worthy through their actions as you have done." Nora looked around the cabin that had been her prison and refuge for 2 long years. Every corner held memories of James, of the life they'd planned together. But now, those memories seemed less like comfort and more like chains binding her to grief. "I need time," she said finally. "To think, to decide." Altaha nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course." He moved toward the door where his warriors waited outside. "I must return to my people now. There are matters that require my attention. Will I see you again?" The question escaped before Nora could stop it, revealing more of her feelings than she'd intended. Altaha paused in the doorway, the morning light catching the planes of his face. "In 3 days' time, I will return. For your answer, whatever it may be." He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, then turned and was gone. Through the window, Nora watched him mount a horse his warriors had brought, his movement still bearing traces of his recent wounds, but no less graceful for it. The small band of Apache moved like shadows into the trees, vanishing as completely as if they'd never been there at all. The cabin felt suddenly larger, emptier than before. Nora stood motionless in the center of the main room, surrounded by the aftermath of violence. Broken furniture, blood-stained floorboards, the body of Smith still crumpled near the door. Outside, Crawford's men lay where they had fallen. There would be bodies to bury, explanations to craft should anyone from the fort come checking. Yet all Nora could think about was Altaha's offer and the decision that now lay before her. Stay in this cabin with its ghosts and memories, or venture into unknown territory, both geographically and emotionally. The very thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. With methodical determination, Nora began cleaning up the cabin, trying to restore order to her disrupted world. As she worked, her mind circled continuously around the choice she faced. When evening came, she built a fire and sat before it with James's wedding ring in her palm, the ring she'd removed from his cold hand 2 years ago and kept as a talisman of her grief. In the dancing light, the simple gold band seemed to speak of a love that had been real, but was now irretrievably past. "What would you have me do, James?" she whispered to the empty room. No answer came, of course. Yet as she sat there, Nora recalled her dream from the night before. James pointing towards something she couldn't see, telling her it was about finding a way home. Perhaps this was what he'd meant, not the physical structure of the cabin they'd built together, but home in its deeper sense, a place of belonging, of purpose, of love. The realization brought tears to her eyes, not the bitter tears of grief she'd grown accustomed to, but something cleansing and cathartic. For the first time since James's death, Nora allowed herself to truly mourn him, not as a wife determined to preserve his memory through her own isolation, but as a woman acknowledging both what she had lost and what might still lie ahead. When dawn broke the next morning, Nora knew what she needed to do. The eastern canyon was just as Crawford had described, a jagged slash in the earth 3 miles from her cabin, its walls rising steep and imposing against the blue sky. Nora had ridden out at first light, following game trails through the pines until the terrain opened into rocky badlands. Finding the cave took longer. The canyon walls were riddled with shallow depressions and crevices, most leading nowhere. By midday, frustration had nearly convinced Nora to abandon the search. Then she spotted it, an opening partly concealed by a fallen boulder, large enough for a man to enter if he crouched. Dismounting and securing her horse to a stunted juniper, Nora approached cautiously, rifle in hand. The cave mouth was cool and dark, smelling of dust and something else, the lingering scent of old smoke. "James," she whispered, knowing with sudden certainty that she'd found the right place. This was where her husband had come during those final secretive days. The passage narrowed briefly before opening into a small chamber where daylight filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Nora's breath caught as she saw clear evidence of habitation: a stone-ringed fire pit, a crude shelf carved into the rock wall, stacks of dry firewood. Someone had lived here, or at least spent significant time here. Had it been James? Or someone he had helped, as Crawford had claimed? Moving deeper into the cave, Nora found her answer. In the furthest corner, partially hidden behind a jutting rock formation, lay a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. With trembling hands, she unfolded it to reveal contents that stole her breath: a child's moccasin, decorated with Apache beadwork, a wooden toy horse, obviously carved by a loving hand, and most telling of all, a small deerskin pouch, identical to the one Altaha carried. Inside was a lock of straight black hair tied with sinew. Nora sank to her knees, clutching the small treasures as understanding washed over her. Crawford had twisted the truth, as Altaha had said, weaving lies with just enough reality to create doubt. James had indeed been helping someone, not holding them captive for gold, but protecting them, hiding them, protecting Altaha's family. Whether Nahimana and her child had survived after leaving this cave, whether they had found the safety they sought, Nora couldn't know. But one thing was certain: James had died trying to help them, not exploit them. He had been the man she'd believed him to be. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she rewrapped the bundle with reverent care. Whatever had happened after James's involvement, these treasures deserved to be returned to Altaha. They were part of his history, his family's legacy, regardless of how the story had ended. Emerging from the cave into the harsh afternoon sunlight, Nora felt somehow lighter, as if a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted from her shoulders. James's final acts had been ones of compassion and courage. She could honor him best by showing the same qualities in her own life going forward. As she mounted her horse for the return journey, Nora's decision crystallized with perfect clarity. 3 days would pass quickly, but she would be ready when Altaha returned. The morning of the 3rd day dawned clear and cold, with frost glittering on the grass and a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. Nora had spent the intervening time preparing, sorting through her possessions, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The cabin itself she would abandon to the elements. Let nature reclaim the site of so much grief and violence. She had just finished loading the last bundle onto her horse when a movement at the tree line caught her attention. Altaha emerged from the shadows, alone this time, mounted on the same dappled grey horse he'd ridden away on 3 days before. Nora's heart quickened at the sight of him. He sat tall and straight in the saddle, his black hair gleaming in the morning light, his expression guarded yet hopeful as he approached. He halted a respectful distance away, taking in her packed horse and the closed shutters of the cabin. Understanding dawned in his eyes, but he asked nonetheless, "You have made your decision?" Nora nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. "I found the cave," she said. "I found evidence that James was helping your wife and child, protecting them." Something flickered in Altaha's expression: pain, hope, disbelief, all mingled together. "Show me." From her saddlebag, Nora withdrew the bundle she'd discovered in the cave. With reverent care, she unwrapped it, revealing the small treasures within: the moccasin, the wooden horse, the lock of hair. Altaha dismounted in a fluid motion and approached slowly, as if afraid the items might vanish if he moved too quickly. When he reached Nora, his hands trembled slightly as they hovered over the bundle. "These were my sons," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This," he touched the wooden horse, "I carved this for his 2nd birthday." "And this?" Nora asked gently, indicating the deerskin pouch with the lock of hair. "Our people cut a lock of hair from a child when they receive their true name," Altaha explained. "Nahimana kept it always, a symbol of his spirit." His fingers brushed the pouch with infinite tenderness. "I thought it lost forever." "They were in the cave," Nora told him, hidden carefully, as if someone intended to return for them. Hope flared in Altaha's eyes, quickly tempered by the realism of a man who had known too much loss to trust easily in miracles. "It means they reached the cave safely. It means they lived beyond the raid on our village." He looked up at Nora, genuine gratitude in his expression. "And it means your husband was indeed a good man, as I believed." "Yes," Nora agreed softly. "He was." Altaha carefully rewrapped the precious bundle and secured it inside his own saddlebag. When he turned back to Nora, his composure had returned, though his eyes still held the echo of powerful emotion. "And now?" he asked, his gaze taking in her preparations for departure. "What path have you chosen, Nora McKenna?" Nora took a deep breath, her decision made with the clarity that comes only from absolute certainty. "I'm leaving this place. There's nothing for me here anymore except painful memories." A shadow passed over Altaha's face, quickly controlled. "I understand. The settlement to the south would welcome—" "No," Nora interrupted gently. "That's not where I'm going." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she dared. "You spoke of a place at the edge of your territory, a trading post, where someone might build a new life, where someone who walks between worlds might find purpose." Hope returned to Altaha's eyes, cautious but unmistakable. "It is a 3-day ride from here. The land is not easy, but it is beautiful in its own way. Those who live there must be strong." "I'm stronger than I knew," Nora said, thinking of all she had survived, all she had learned about herself in these past days. Strong enough to start again, to build something new. The unspoken question hung between them. Was she proposing to make this journey alone, or was she accepting the deeper invitation Altaha had offered? With courage born of newfound clarity, Nora reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm against hers, calloused from a warrior's life, but gentle in its touch. That same strange warmth she'd felt during their brief contacts before now flowed freely between them, no longer frightening, but welcome. "I would like to see this place," she said softly. "With you, if you're willing to show me the way." Altaha's fingers tightened around hers, his expression transforming with a smile that reached his eyes. "It would be my honor," he replied, his voice carrying warmth she'd never heard before. "The path is not an easy one." "Few worthwhile paths are," Nora interjected. His smile deepened at that. "True, but those who walk them together find the journey lighter." The word hung between them, full of possibility. Neither spoke of love. It was too soon, too complicated by the grief they both still carried. But in that moment, something new began to take root between them. Something built on respect, shared struggle, and the recognition of kindred spirits who had both lost everything and somehow found the courage to begin again. Nora mounted her horse, taking one last look at the cabin that had been both sanctuary and prison for so long. "I'm ready," she said, turning away from the past and toward whatever future awaited. Side by side they rode away from the clearing, two figures moving in perfect rhythm across the winter landscape. Behind them, the cabin stood silent and empty, its purpose served. Ahead lay unknown territory, challenging, perhaps dangerous, but alive with possibility. As they reached the tree line, Altaha spoke, his words carrying on the clear morning air. "Among my people, there is a saying, when the heart has known great sorrow, it gains the strength to hold great joy." Nora considered this, feeling the truth of it resonating within her. "I think I'm ready to test that theory," she replied. His answering smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains, warm, powerful, transformative. "As am I." Together they passed into the shelter of the pines, leaving no trace of their passage except hoofprints that would soon vanish beneath the next snowfall. Two souls from different worlds, bound by shared pain and nascent hope, riding toward a future neither could have imagined, but one they would build together day by day with courage and newfound trust. In the distance, eagle sharp eyes might have glimpsed a small band of Apache warriors keeping watch from a ridge, ensuring their leader's safe passage. But no one observed the moment when Nora's hand reached out, or when Altaha's met it halfway, a simple gesture bridging worlds that had seemed forever separate, promising possibilities that defied the harsh dividing lines of their time and place. The winter sun climbed higher, casting their elongated shadows before them as they rode west, toward mountains painted in shades of purple and blue, toward a trading post that stood empty, waiting for new life, toward a future where a widow and a warrior might find, against all odds, that the heart's capacity for healing matched its capacity for pain. And in that moment, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Nora McKenna felt truly, completely alive. 6 months later. The trading post stood transformed. What had once been a simple structure of adobe and timber now boasted a vegetable garden, a corral for horses, and freshly whitewashed walls that gleamed in the Arizona sunset. A sign hung above the door, painted in both English and Apache characters, "Peaceful Crossing Trading Post." Inside, Nora arranged newly arrived supplies on shelves built by Altaha's hands. The past months had been challenging, rebuilding the abandoned post, establishing relationships with both native traders and white travelers, navigating the complex cultural boundaries of a territory still rife with tension and prejudice. Yet in those same months, something remarkable had blossomed. The trading post had become exactly what Altaha had envisioned, a place between worlds, where Apache hunters could trade pelts and crafts for supplies they needed, where settlers could purchase native-made goods and receive fair treatment, where the seeds of understanding might take root in soil long poisoned by hatred and fear. And beyond that, something even more unexpected had grown between Nora and Altaha themselves. What had begun as mutual respect forged in danger had deepened into friendship, partnership, and finally love. A love neither had thought possible after such devastating losses. The sound of hoofbeats announced Altaha's return from a hunting trip. Nora stepped outside, shading her eyes against the setting sun as he approached. He rode with the same fluid grace that had first caught her attention all those months ago, though now his presence brought not fear, but joy. "A successful hunt?" she called as he dismounted. Altaha's smile was answer enough. In the months since they'd left her cabin behind, that smile had become more frequent, transforming his stern warrior's countenance into something Nora found increasingly beautiful. "Enough to share with those who came seeking refuge," he replied, securing his horse. "3 families arrived while I was gone?" Nora nodded. "Apache, from the northern bands. They heard this was a place of peace." The trading post had gradually become known as a sanctuary for those seeking escape from the escalating conflicts between natives and settlers. Altaha's reputation ensured Apache families were welcome. Nora's presence offered similar assurance to settlers hoping to avoid violence. It wasn't perfect. There had been threats from both sides. White militiamen suspicious of the Apache woman, as they called Nora, traditionalists among Altaha's people who disapproved of his closeness with a white settler. Yet they had persevered, building something that stood as living proof that another way was possible. As Altaha approached, Nora felt the familiar flutter in her chest that his presence still evoked. 6 months had done nothing to diminish the connection between them. If anything, it had grown stronger with each challenge faced together, each quiet evening spent in conversation, each moment of understanding that transcended the boundaries others insisted must divide them. "You've had word from the fort?" he asked, noting the opened letter on the trading post counter. "Yes. The new Indian agent wants to meet with us," Nora replied. "He's heard about what we're doing here. He thinks it might serve as a model for other territories." Altaha's expression turned thoughtful. "Will he be an ally or another Crawford?" "We'll find out together," Nora said, with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. The fearful widow who had once barricaded herself in a lonely cabin had transformed into a woman of strength and purpose, one who could face uncertain futures without flinching. As the sun sank lower behind the western mountains, they moved to their favorite spot, a simple bench overlooking the valley, positioned to catch the last golden rays of daylight. It had become their ritual to end each day here, watching the transition from day to night, sharing the events that had separated them. "There's something else," Nora said, as they settled onto the bench. "Something I haven't told you yet." Altaha turned to her, one eyebrow raised in question. "Important news?" "The most important," she confirmed, taking his hand and placing it gently against her abdomen, still flat but containing the secret she'd confirmed just that morning. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by an expression of such raw joy and wonder that it brought tears to Nora's eyes. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Nora nodded, her own joy mirroring his. "A new life, one that belongs to both worlds." Altaha gathered her carefully into his arms, his face buried in her hair as emotion overcame his usual stoic demeanor. When he finally drew back, there were tears on his cheeks, Tears he made no attempt to hide or deny. "My people have a belief," he said softly, "that children born of great love carry special strength, that they become bridges between what was and what might be." "I believe that too," Nora whispered, resting her forehead against his. "This child will know both sides of their heritage, will be proud of all they are." As darkness gathered around them, they remained on the bench, speaking quietly of the future, not just their own, but the future they hoped to help create through their work at Peaceful Crossing. A future where understanding might eventually overcome hatred, where differences might be respected rather than feared. It was an audacious hope in a land still torn by violence and mistrust. Yet as Nora leaned against Altaha's shoulder, his arm warm and protective around her, their child growing between them, she felt a certainty that transcended rational thought. They had both survived devastating loss, had both carried grief that should have destroyed them. Yet here they were, building something new from the ashes of what had been taken. If such healing was possible for them, perhaps it was possible on a larger scale as well. "What are you thinking?" Altaha asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. Nora smiled in the gathering darkness. That sometimes the most feared warrior and the most stubborn widow might be exactly what's needed to change the world, even if it's just their small corner of it. His answering laugh was soft but genuine, another gift she treasured, having learned how rare it had been before they found each other. As the first stars appeared overhead, they remained together on their bench, two people who had pushed past fear and prejudice to discover something profound, that love, once thought lost forever, could return in new and unexpected forms. That healing was possible, even from the deepest wounds. That home wasn't a place at all, but a feeling found in the presence of those who truly saw you for all that you were. And as the night deepened around Peaceful Crossing trading post, that feeling of home enveloped them both, as real and sustaining as the child growing between them, a promise that even in the harshest landscapes, new life could take root and flourish. The end. Dear friends, we have reached the end of another story. We hope you enjoyed every moment, whether while doing your daily chores or simply relaxing with a warm cup of milk or tea. We love being your daily companion, your moment of relaxation, happiness, and pleasure. As always, we take great pride in presenting you with timeless stories of love, companionship, and happy moments. These quiet times together are what make our days special, the gentle pause in our busy world where imagination takes flight and hearts find comfort. We understand how important these moments of escape can be, especially at the end of a long day when the mind needs rest and the soul needs nourishment. It brings us such joy to be that soft voice in your ear, that familiar presence keeping you company through evenings and quiet afternoons. Remember to take care of yourselves, dear listeners. Find those small pleasures that make each day worthwhile, whether it's the warmth of sunlight through your window, the comfort of a favorite chair, or the simple pleasure of a well-told tale. Life's treasures often hide in these gentle moments of pause and appreciation. Until our next story, may your days be filled with warmth and your nights with peaceful rest. Thank you for allowing our voices to be part of your world. We love your comments. We love your presence here. With heartfelt appreciation, Wild West Whispers team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this unforgettable journey. We truly hope this story brought you a moment of warmth, emotion, and reflection. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe, leave a kind comment, and share it with someone who loves powerful stories. From the bottom of our hearts, your support keeps us going and motivates us to continue creating stories filled with love, redemption, and meaningful twists. And remember, at the end of this video, you'll see a new story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised once again by another emotional tale like this one. With love, the Wild West Whispers team.